Imagine this. You're sitting in a silent room. White walls, a single wooden desk in front of you. A sheet of paper lies there, neat rows of blank lines waiting to be filled. A clock ticks in the corner, each second pressing against your chest like a soft but relentless weight. You know the rules. Answer the questions exactly as you've been taught. No creativity, no deviation, just recall. You write what you remember, not what you think. And the strange thing, you're praised for it. Years pass. Different rooms, different desks, different clocks. But the same invisible game. The questions change, but the rules never do. The right answer is the one they gave you beforehand. Your role is not to discover truth. It's to prove you can echo it back. And then one day, maybe in your late 20s, maybe far later, you're asked a question no textbook ever prepared you for. Who are you really? You freeze. Not because it's hard, but because you don't even know where to begin. The training that once made you smart now makes you helpless. There's no formula for this one. The truth you've avoided begins to surface. You weren't taught to think. You were trained to remember. It's not your fault. School, for all its noble intentions, conditioned you in a way that served the system, but not your mind. You learned how to repeat, to comply, to pass, but not how to stand alone in a world that does not hand out answer keys. You see, memory can make you look intelligent, but thinking, true thinking, can make you dangerous. Dangerous to illusions, to false authorities, to the comforting lies that keep society predictable. So instead, the system gave you the appearance of intelligence without the substance. But here's the paradox. The more obediently you followed, the less you saw the bars around you. The more correct your answers, the more invisible your cage became. You memorized formulas for physics, but not the physics of your own mind. You memorized the dates of wars, but not the mechanics of why humans keep waging them. You memorized the structure of essays, but not how to build a thought that could change someone's life. You mastered the art of passing tests. Yet now, in the test of life, you feel unequipped. Ask yourself, how many of your beliefs are truly yours, and how many were handed to you? How many decisions have you made by thinking from first principles, rather than defaulting to what makes sense because you've heard it before? When was the last time you questioned a fact so deeply that it broke open into something new, something neither you nor your teachers saw coming? If you hesitate to answer, it's not because you're incapable. It's because you were never trained to do so. Imagine walking into a room with no instructions, no examples, and no right answers. At first, your chest tightens. There's a flicker of panic. The mind craves the safety of the known. But then something happens. You begin to observe. You experiment. You connect dots no one told you to connect. In that moment, you are not recalling. You are creating. And in that moment, you touch the kind of thinking that could change everything. But here's the unsettling question. Why does that moment feel rare? Why does thinking feel like stepping into a forbidden space? What if your education wasn't meant to free your mind, but to domesticate it? What if every time you were rewarded for remembering, you were being nudged away from the wild, untamed power of true thought? What if, right now, entire layers of your intelligence remain dormant? Not because they don't exist, but because you never had permission to use them. Think about it. Most of the monumental thinkers in history, Socrates, Galileo, Newton, Einstein, were not celebrated in their lifetimes for their ability to remember. They were feared, doubted, resisted, because they thought, and thinking is unpredictable. It can't be controlled. So here you are, caught between two selves, the one that plays the game well and the one that suspects the game was never meant for you. The desk, the paper, the ticking clock, they are long gone, but the training lingers in your every decision. And if you don't break it, you may live your entire life mistaking memory for thought, repetition for intelligence, obedience for wisdom. So here is the great, unsettling question that will haunt you until you answer it. If the you who's been making your choices all these years was shaped by repetition, rules, and rote recall, then who might you become if you learned, finally, to think? The answer begins with seeing the hidden force that shaped you, and it's far older, deeper, and more deliberate than you've been led to believe. The hidden problem is not simply that schools favored memory over thought. It is that this preference has been woven into the very fabric of society for centuries. The conditioning you received in the classroom was not an isolated flaw in education. It was the continuation of an ancient impulse, control through predictability. Carl Jung once wrote that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. But in our case, it's more than parental influence. It's the unlived thoughts of entire generations. From the earliest days of centralized schooling, the goal was efficiency, not enlightenment. A predictable worker, a predictable citizen, a predictable believer. These were the products desired. And predictability is built not through wild, self-originating thought, but through standardized recall. Memory is safer than thought. Nietzsche warned that the most perfidious way of harming a cause consists of defending it deliberately with faulty arguments. What happens when the cause is education, and the faulty argument is that to know is to remember? We become so busy collecting facts that we forget to ask why those facts were chosen for us, and by whom. Beneath this lies a psychological truth. Humans are tribal animals, wired for belonging. Questioning too much risks alienation. Remembering correctly ensures acceptance. So the child, eager for approval, learns quickly that the reward comes not from thinking differently, but from thinking the same. The hidden force here is not just authority. It is our own fear of separation. Schopenhauer spoke of the will to live as the core of human existence, but he also recognized the pain of individuality. To think for yourself is to be isolated at times, to bear the weight of uncertainty without the comforting crutch of consensus. The school system, knowingly or not, offers an escape from that discomfort. Stay within the boundaries of the known, and you will not stand alone. But here's the philosophical dagger. This comfort is the same mechanism that dulls the mind's edge. In Sartre's view, man is condemned to be free. Yet in the classroom, that freedom is quietly traded for the illusion of certainty. It is an existential bargain. Give up your right to question in exchange for the reassurance that someone, somewhere, already has the answers. You carry that bargain into adulthood without realizing it. You sit in meetings at work, nodding at ideas you've never dissected. You vote for policies whose roots you've never traced. You form opinions on events you've never examined beyond the headlines. And all along, you feel like you're thinking, when in truth, you are remembering the thoughts of others. Viktor Frankl, in The Hell of the Concentration Camps, observed that even there, between stimulus and response, there remained a space where freedom and dignity resided. That space is thinking. But for most of us, that space has been narrowed by years of conditioning until it's barely perceptible. We respond not from conscious choice, but from the automatic library of memorized scripts we carry in our minds. And the problem runs deeper still. Aldous Huxley foresaw a world where people would be so saturated with distractions, pleasures, and superficial knowledge that they would stop desiring truth altogether. The modern extension of schooling achieves something similar. It gives you the tools to recall endless fragments of information while making it feel unnecessary, even burdensome, to investigate them. Why would you, when your performance is judged not by your capacity to think, but by how closely your answers match the expected ones? The psychological roots intertwine with cultural ones. Industrial-age schooling mirrored the assembly line. Standardized inputs, standardized outputs. It was efficient, measurable, and scalable. Perfect for producing workers, less so for producing thinkers. Over time, this became normalized to the point where we no longer questioned it. Parents now measure their children's intelligence by test scores, employers by degrees, politicians by their ability to recite party lines. And you measure yourself by how well you can play along. There is also the quieter, more insidious layer, identity. Over years, your sense of self fuses with the idea of being smart in the way school defined it. To challenge that definition feels like erasing yourself. It's not just that thinking is hard, it's that thinking differently risks dismantling the very foundation of who you believe you are. And so the cycle perpetuates. You live within a narrative written long before you, believing the thoughts in your head are yours, when in truth, many are inherited echoes. But what is most dangerous is that this arrangement doesn't feel like oppression. It feels normal. It feels safe. And safety has a narcotic effect. It lulls the mind into accepting its own imprisonment. The ancient Greeks had a word, doxa, for common belief, the accepted opinion of the many. Philosophers like Plato urged people to move beyond doxa into episteme, true knowledge earned through reason. But in a world that rewards conformity, why endure the pain of climbing out of the cave when the shadows are warm and familiar? This is why the hidden problem is so resilient. It aligns perfectly with human comfort, cultural structure, and institutional interest. It thrives in the intersection between your fear of exclusion, your craving for certainty, and the system's need for control, which leads to the cruel irony. The skills you needed most, the ability to ask dangerous questions, to navigate ambiguity, to think without permission, were the very skills your education left undeveloped. Instead, it taught you to polish the walls of your cage and call it achievement. And unless you unlearn this conditioning, you will continue to mistake the echoes in your mind for your own voice. You will continue to play roles written by others, never realizing you could write your own. The problem is not that you are incapable of thinking, it's that you've been persuaded since childhood to believe thinking is unnecessary, even risky. But there is a fracture in this illusion, a moment when the weight of the memorized world begins to feel unbearable. A question so raw, so unanswerable by memory, that it rips a hole in the script. That moment is coming for you, if it hasn't already. And when it does, you'll face a choice. Retreat to the comfort of recall, or step into the terrifying, exhilarating unknown of thought itself. And if you step forward, you will begin to see the full shape of the trap you've been living in, and the unseen consequences it has had on your life. You don't notice it at first. The conditioning doesn't announce itself with shackles or commands. It hides in the most ordinary moments. The way you hesitate before speaking in a meeting because you're not sure if your thought aligns with the right perspective. The way you instinctively reach for your phone to search for an answer instead of sitting in the discomfort of figuring it out yourself. The way your mind feels strangely blank when faced with a truly open-ended problem. These are not accidents. They are the aftershocks of years spent equating correctness with safety, obedience with worth. The unseen consequences begin in your personal life, where subtle habits of thoughtlessness creep in. You defer to authority, not just in obvious places like law or medicine, but in the intimate realm of self-definition. You believe the career you should have, the relationships you should maintain, the life milestones you should pursue are somehow self-evident truths, but in reality, they are inherited templates. You didn't reason your way to them. You remembered them, absorbed them, replayed them. Your decisions wear the costume of free will, but underneath, they are algorithms written by others. The brain, shaped by years of rote learning, develops an almost physical aversion to ambiguity. Neurologically, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of complex reasoning, requires effort and energy to engage. Memorization trains different circuits, fast recall pathways that bypass deeper analysis. The result? The moment a situation demands creative problem-solving, your mental reflex is to either search for a stored answer or avoid the question altogether. And in avoiding it, you let life make choices for you. Culturally, the consequences run even deeper. Entire societies can operate in a state of intellectual autopilot. Cognitive biases, confirmation bias, authority bias, the bandwagon effect, thrive in environments where thinking has been outsourced to experts, influencers, and tradition. When people are trained to reproduce knowledge rather than interrogate it, misinformation doesn't have to be imposed. It spreads organically, carried along by minds that have never practiced dismantling falsehoods. And because you were taught to prize the appearance of intelligence, you often don't notice when your knowledge is just a collection of unexamined hand-me-downs. There's a quiet arrogance in thinking you know, when in truth you've only memorized. This arrogance is dangerous because it closes the door to curiosity. Why investigate if you already know? Why challenge the familiar when it feels like certainty? This mental complacency is the perfect breeding ground for manipulation. Propaganda doesn't have to work hard, it just has to match the tone and structure of the information you were trained to trust. Even your emotional life is shaped by this conditioning. Emotional resilience, the ability to sit with uncertainty, doubt, and discomfort, is inseparable from the ability to think critically. But if you've been taught to escape discomfort by finding the right answer as quickly as possible, then every emotionally complex situation becomes unbearable. The friend who disagrees with your worldview feels like a threat. The job that requires you to innovate feels overwhelming. The relationship that demands deep self-reflection feels exhausting. And so, without realizing it, you avoid the very experiences that could expand you. There is also the haunting consequence of wasted potential. Your mind is a vast network capable of producing insights no one has ever seen before. But if it has been used primarily for recall, it atrophies in its higher functions. This is not just a loss for you, it is a loss for the world. How many groundbreaking ideas, solutions, works of art, or acts of wisdom have died unborn because their owners never learned to think beyond what they were given? Society feels the cost in stagnation. We face crises, climate change, inequality, ethical dilemmas in technology that cannot be solved by memorizing old solutions. Yet we send wave after wave of graduates into the world trained to look backward for answers instead of forward into the unknown. The system creates exactly what it fears: a world unable to adapt. And yet, the most tragic consequence is the quiet erosion of the self. To think for yourself is to discover who you are. When you do not think, when you live in the borrowed patterns of memory, you become a ghost inside your own life. Your opinions, preferences, and even desires are inherited, recycled, second-hand. You may not feel the loss immediately, ghosts rarely do, but there comes a day when you catch yourself mid-action, mid-conversation, mid-life, and wonder, is this me? Or is this just the echo of everything I was told to be? In that moment, you glimpse the bars of the invisible cage. The irony is that by avoiding thought to stay safe, you create the very instability you fear. A life built on memorized truths is fragile. When reality shifts, when the answers you stored no longer fit, you have nothing to fall back on. No mental toolkit for recalibration. No deep-rooted compass of your own making. Just panic, confusion, and a desperate search for the next authority to tell you what's true. This is why so many collapse in the face of personal or societal upheaval. They were never taught to navigate without a map, and life inevitably will throw you into landscapes where no map exists. The unseen consequences are everywhere, but they share one core pattern. They strip you of sovereignty. Not the political kind, but the internal kind, the sovereignty of mind, the right to be the author of your own beliefs, the architect of your own reasoning. Without that, you are a citizen of a mental dictatorship whose borders you never questioned. But here is where the tension sharpens. If the problem were purely external, if it were only the system, then perhaps the solution would be as simple as escaping it. But the truth is crueler. The system is now inside you. The habits of mind, the reflexes, the preferences for certainty, they are not just external chains. They are self-reinforcing loops in your own neural pathways. Escaping them will not feel like removing a cage. It will feel like dismantling part of yourself. And yet, that dismantling is the only way forward. Because the cost of staying as you are is not simply ignorance, it is the forfeiture of your deepest human capacity, the ability to look at reality and see it fresh, unfiltered, alive. That capacity can be recovered, but it will require rebellion, not against teachers or parents or institutions alone, but against the part of you that clings to the comfort of memorized thought. The next step is not gentle. It will feel like tearing at the seams of your own mind. But it is the step that transforms a passive receiver into a living thinker. It is the rebellion that begins when you decide the answers you were given are no longer enough. And when that rebellion begins, the game changes entirely. Rebellion does not begin with a manifesto or a public act of defiance. It begins in the smallest, quietest place imaginable, inside the privacy of your own mind. It begins the moment you decide to pause before giving the expected answer. To let silence stretch where you once would have rushed to fill it with memorized certainty. It begins when you choose to ask one more question, one that no one asked you to ask. At first, this act feels almost meaningless. You doubt it. You hear the old voices telling you not to waste time reinventing the wheel, not to overcomplicate things, to trust the wisdom that's already been settled. But the rebellion is not about reinventing wheels, it's about remembering you have hands. Breaking free requires a shift so radical it feels unnatural. You must unlearn before you learn. The first step is to dismantle the reflex of immediate recall. This doesn't mean erasing what you know. It means refusing to treat what you know as untouchable truth. A historical fact, a social norm, a personal belief, each must be held up to the light and turned over until you see its structure. Ask, who told me this? What did they gain from me believing it? What would it mean if this were not true? This is the philosopher's habit of mind, and history shows it is dangerous to the established order. Socrates roamed Athens with nothing but questions, and for this he was condemned. But his legacy survives precisely because he understood that thinking begins where certainty ends. The second step is to practice first principles thinking. Strip a problem to its raw elements, free from inherited assumptions. Elon Musk famously used this to rethink engineering problems, but you can apply it anywhere, in your work, in your relationships, in your understanding of yourself. Instead of asking, what's the usual way? Ask, if I knew nothing, how would I build this from the ground up? At first, this feels like standing without a railing. You'll wobble, but the balance you gain is real. The third step is exposure to minds unlike your own. The school system often filtered what you read to fit a certain narrative. To rebel, you must break that filter. Read Nietzsche alongside Confucius. Read feminist theory alongside Stoic philosophy. Read the critics of your favorite thinkers with the same seriousness you give their supporters. The goal is not to agree with all. It's to grow allergic to intellectual homogeneity. The fourth step is to cultivate what feels like an almost obsolete skill, deep attention. Thinking is not compatible with the constant interruption of the digital age. The algorithms are built to keep you skimming, scrolling, consuming. To think, you must reclaim the mental space that allows ideas to collide and evolve. This means setting aside sacred, uninterrupted time, minutes, then hours, where you wrestle with a single thought until it changes shape. And here lies the fifth and most radical step. Act on your thinking, even when it costs you. The rebellion is not complete if it lives only in the mind. The system's greatest insurance policy is that even if you think differently, you will behave the same. To break that, you must align action with insight. This may mean saying something unpopular, declining a path that others expect you to take, refusing to adopt a belief that makes you comfortable but false. This is not an abstract process. It is messy, sometimes lonely, and always uncomfortable. But discomfort is the proof that you are moving beyond the familiar grooves of thought. Comfort is the domain of memory. Discomfort is the forge of thinking. Think of Galileo peering through his telescope and seeing moons orbiting Jupiter, a truth that shattered the geocentric model the Church had enforced. He faced condemnation, but he also held in his mind something the world could not yet see, a reality beyond the sanctioned truth. You will face your own version of this, moments where you see differently and the world tries to talk you out of it. Hold the line. Rebellion is sustained by one other essential practice, the cultivation of inner sovereignty. This is the unshakable sense that your mind belongs to you, even when everything around you demands that you outsource it. This sovereignty is not arrogance. It's a kind of quiet strength, the ability to stand alone in thought without needing the approval of the crowd. It comes from repeated acts of independent reasoning, from the willingness to be wrong on your own terms rather than right on someone else's. And here is the paradox of the rebellion. The more you do it, the less it feels like rebellion. At first, thinking for yourself feels like defiance because it breaks the norms you've lived in. But over time, it becomes your natural state. The real shift is when you stop thinking of yourself as someone who rebels and start seeing yourself as someone who simply lives in the open space beyond the walls. This transformation has a ripple effect. When you embody it, others notice. Your conversations change. You ask better questions. You respond to uncertainty with curiosity instead of fear. This, more than any lecture or debate, awakens the dormant thinkers around you. And that is how rebellion spreads, not through mass movements alone, but through individual awakenings multiplied across countless lives. By breaking free, you do not just reclaim your mind. You become a living example that it is possible. And in a world built on the machinery of mental conformity, that example is revolutionary. But understand this, the rebellion is not an end in itself. It is the doorway. Beyond it lies something even more profound than freedom from conditioning. Beyond it lies a way of seeing that dissolves the boundary between what you think you know and what is truly there. It is not about replacing false answers with true ones. It is about discovering the dimension where answers themselves are secondary to perception. This is the threshold of the ultimate truth, the deepest realization that can emerge once you are no longer bound by the need to memorize, to conform, to obey. Step through, and you will not simply think differently, you will see differently, and once you see, you cannot go back. There comes a moment in every true rebellion when you realize the enemy was never the institution, the teacher, the textbook, or even the culture. The enemy was the invisible tether between your mind and the need for certainty. It was not the fact that you were taught to memorize. It was that you built your entire sense of reality on the assumption that truth is something given to you, rather than something you uncover for yourself. The ultimate truth is unsettling because it reveals the flaw not just in schooling, but in how most of humanity approaches knowledge. You have been living in a second-hand reality, mistaking the map for the territory. All your life you have held words, concepts, and formulas in your head and thought, this is the world. But the world has never been in your head. It has been moving, shifting, overflowing just beyond the edges of what you can name. Once you see this, something strange happens. You stop treating knowledge as a possession and start seeing it as a relationship. In a possession model, you either have the right answer or you don't. In a relationship model, you are always in conversation with reality, and the conversation never ends. This is what the great thinkers understood. Newton did not discover gravity as if it were a coin lying in the dirt. He noticed patterns, tested them, built models, but he knew the models were provisional. Einstein broke them open again. This is the essence of thinking, not to cling to what is known, but to use it as a raft to reach a place where it can no longer hold you. Then you build another. The ultimate realization is that thinking is not the acquisition of conclusions. It is the art of navigation. You are not here to store knowledge like a warehouse. You are here to become an instrument that can detect, interpret, and respond to the living flow of reality as it changes. Once you see this, memory becomes a tool, not a master. You can still recall facts when needed, but you no longer confuse recall with comprehension. You understand that what you know today is scaffolding for what you will dismantle tomorrow. And this understanding brings with it an unexpected freedom. You no longer fear being wrong. In the old model, wrongness was a kind of death. It meant losing your place in the hierarchy, failing the test, disappointing the authority. In the new model, wrongness is the engine of insight. Every wrong turn shows you more of the territory. This shift does something profound to your identity. You stop defining yourself by what you know and start defining yourself by how you see. You become less concerned with defending beliefs and more concerned with refining perception. You learn to sit with questions without forcing them into premature answers. This is the beginning of intellectual humility, not the false humility of pretending you know nothing, but the genuine humility of knowing that reality is always larger than your current grasp. And here, another layer of truth emerges. Thinking clearly is not just a cognitive skill, it is a moral act. When you think for yourself, you take responsibility for the shape of your perception, for the consequences of the beliefs you hold, and for the actions that flow from them. You stop outsourcing your conscience to institutions, traditions, or group consensus. You begin to feel the full weight of what it means to be a free mind in an interconnected world. This can be terrifying at first. Freedom means you cannot hide behind, "I was just following orders," or "that's what I was taught." Every decision becomes yours. Every blind spot you leave unexamined is one you have chosen. But in this responsibility lies your dignity. Viktor Frankl's insight in the camps, that the last of human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, now becomes more than a survival strategy. It becomes a philosophy of life. To think is to choose your stance toward reality, moment by moment. And the most powerful stance is not certainty, but openness. An openness strong enough to absorb contradiction without collapsing, to face complexity without retreating into slogans, to love truth more than the comfort of being right. The final revelation is that the 10-minute method you sought is not a trick or a hack. It is the moment-to-moment practice of this stance. In any situation, you can pause. You can resist the reflex to recall. You can ask, what am I assuming here? What if it's not true? What else could be possible? This pause is the crack where light gets in. 10 minutes a day of genuine thinking, stripped of the rush to answer, will rewire your mind over time. Not because the minutes themselves are magical, but because they plant the seed of a habit that grows into a way of being. And once this way of being takes root, you are no longer dependent on the approval of the system that trained you. You become self-correcting. You become immune to the cheap certainty that enslaves so many. Most people will never take this step. They will live in the echo chamber of remembered truths, mistaking repetition for wisdom. But if you do take it, you will join a lineage of minds who carried the torch of thought through the dark corridors of conformity. And here is the final paradox. The moment you truly learn to think for yourself, you realize you are not alone. Across centuries, cultures, and languages, there are others who have walked this path. Socrates, Hypatia, Descartes, Wollstonecraft, James Baldwin, each facing their own version of the system, each refusing to surrender their sight. You join them not by memorizing their words, but by embodying their courage. So the question that began this journey, who might you become if you learned finally to think, is no longer a hypothetical. You become someone who lives without mental masters, someone who navigates reality with eyes open, hands steady, and mind awake, someone who can stand in the midst of uncertainty and feel not fear, but exhilaration. And perhaps most importantly, you become a reminder to others that their own awakening is possible. This is the legacy of true thought, not the preservation of a single answer, but the ignition of 1,000 new questions. And in this, you finally see what school could never teach you, that the mind is not a container to be filled, but a flame to be lit.